The story of Leif and Jeanett, part 9. On the day after I met Jeanett, I spent the day exploring the southern route out of town on Route 13. This route can take you to Oslo or Haugesund. I wanted to visit Kollevåg ski station, and I went there to snowshoe and observe a real Nordic skiing area where they had groomed trails for skiing. I visited the waterfall, Lotofoss, for the first time, and a beautiful old church in the community of Skara. That evening I carved a new tile, the Såfjord, from a photograph that I took on this day. I had learned about the Herald Allstar church on this day as well, which is a wooden church built in the 13th century, not far from Odda. The Stav churches are wooden medieval Christian churches named from the Old Norse word stafa. I was really looking forward to visiting the Herald Allstar church, and this didn't happen out of the blue. When I visited the Herald Allstar church, I was in awe. It was so amazing to me that this church was nearly 800 years old. It was nestled down in the valley, surrounded by steep mountains. And to look at the community surrounding this church was simply a treat to imagine how this community existed here hundreds of years ago. To imagine hundreds of years before cars, when people found this valley a hospitable place to live, made my imagination run wild. To imagine the journey it would have been for anyone to leave this valley to go to any larger community that might have existed nearby really made you feel how isolated living here must have been hundreds of years ago. At the time, I was accustomed to traveling all over Norway. I had been all the way to Kirkenes, which was on the far northwestern border of Norway with Russia, and I had been all the way to Oslo at the opposite end of Norway. I had traveled these distances by car, and I was always by myself. My pride and my love of Norway made me an open book, and I could embrace anywhere that I went. What I mean by this is that I felt like I could call any place in Norway home because of how special Norway is to me. Of course, my grandpa's hometown of Trondheim and Røros are the most important to me in many respects, but the dream that I had, or desire, because I don't like to call it a dream. It makes it sound like my goals in life are a fairy tale. And I don't feel like my dreams are fairy tales. I feel like my goals and aspirations are real possibilities. I want them so badly. Of course, Jeanett was on my mind when I visited the Herald Allstar church. It's interesting to think back long before I met Jeanett. I have not looked back to see when I made my very first post of her. I would post about Taylor Swift, and I would make posts featuring other women, mostly from some of the Viking pages that I would follow. These were the types of pages on Facebook and Instagram that contained photos of women wearing more fanciful, modern-looking Viking clothing and styles. I also posted modern Norwegian women wearing the traditional bunad. Posting photographs of women on my social media pages, as you can imagine, was not something that I did the very first day I started my account on Facebook 13 years ago in 2008. Just like how many people felt very uncomfortable with taking selfies at first, and just like how many people didn't like including a photograph of themselves as their profile picture on Facebook, I too had my own uncertainties about how I should act on Facebook. I noticed that when I would make posts featuring Norway and featuring women that I found attractive, I would also notice that I wouldn't get as many likes on other posts that had to do with my business and nature after I made these posts featuring women. So I initially was very reserved when I would post pictures and artwork of Norwegians and Viking women and Vikings and even of Norway. Living by myself and working day in and day out in my studio with virtually no contact with any females is quite a unique situation to be in, especially when you're sharing your life on social media. The other day, I was reading a conversation that someone was having, and they were expressing how Facebook is supposed to be fun. When somebody was questioning them as to whether or not they should be posting something that they just posted. Have you ever thought about how the mood on Facebook has changed from what it was when it first began? Isn't it interesting how the mood on Facebook continues to evolve? I spent many years looking and hoping to get into a relationship with somebody as I became more and more focused on my business. But as every year passed, I started to feel less and less optimistic about any type of meaningful relationship ever occurring. And I'm a very good person, and I have achieved many admirable accomplishments. I have remained healthy and stayed away from alcohol. I have traveled to hundreds of art fairs. I had a gallery in a very busy and notorious tourist destination. Where I spent 2 years by myself from April until November watching this gallery 7 days a week. I had been posting pictures of everything I had been doing on social media pages for years, occasionally showing interest in different women. And out of all those situations, when I could have discovered someone who may have made me feel like we were meant for a relationship, there was no one. No one even closely made me feel like there was a beginning of a relationship. In 2010, I started traveling to Norway and reconnected with my Norwegian family. Every year I returned to Norway, and I spent 2 to 3 weeks traveling all over the country, learning all about Norway, and not one woman in the United States showed any interest in these trips. So in the wee hours of the morning, alone in my workshop, I began feeling comfortable when I posted things about things I enjoyed, because it was a way to express myself, and part of me enjoyed that I was showing all the people who followed me on social media, on my social media pages, what made my juices flow and what made my gears grind. Slowly, over several years, I became comfortable posting pictures of Norwegian women in nature, of Taylor Swift, of Viking women, both mythical, modern, and art created of them. What could have been more healthy than to do that?